Hey guys, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk Beatles here, nothing but Beatles. And I'm having so much fun doing all the interviews that I've been doing. Some of them are panel discussions, many of them are one-on-one, and very often we have guests who return. And that is certainly the case with my guest this time out. To know her is to love her, as the song says. She is part of the bi-weekly Solo Beatles podcast, for which I'm a co-host and she's a co-host, along with Tom Hunyadi and Joe Mayo. Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast. She is also the author of several fine books, including Songs We Were Singing, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser Known Tracks, Michael Jackson FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the King of Pop, Fandom in the Beatles, which she wrote with Ken Womack. And in addition to all that, she is a contributing writer to Beatle Fan. Also, so many of them, I had to write it down. Blinded by Sound, Something Else Reviews, Cinema Centuries. And in addition to all of that, as if that wasn't enough, she's also involved with a series of shows with our friend Plastic EP from Australia, which she'll be talking about, I guess, maybe at the end of our broadcast here. Welcome back, the Kitster, the queen of Beatles social media, Kiddo Toole.
Hi, Ken. It is so great to be back on your show. Great to be talking Beatles with you as usual. Not that we don't talk about it on our other show, but it's great to be in this format with you.
Yeah, I thought this time out, because I'm always trying to look at different angles of things to talk about. Sometimes I ask my guests, well, do you have a burning desire to talk about anything specific? Sometimes that's what I do here on the show. But I thought it might be a good idea. Actually, Kit is kind of like someone who started me off on this path of underappreciated songs and albums because of her book, Songs We Were Singing, which is all about that. Beatles songs, solo Beatles songs, and albums that really deserve to get more attention that they have been. Hard to believe Beatles as a group that there would be any, but you know, with every single artist out there, they have their hits, they have their lesser known cuts, deeper cuts. And so that got the ball rolling for me to do stuff like that on my radio show, Every Little Thing. And we've talked about it here on my channel with Kit. So this is something, what we're going to do now is kind of similar to that. I thought that we'd do something here where my guests would list one Beatles album, one from each of the solo Beatles, that she feels is the most underrated of all of their albums. So I'm sure that every Beatle fan has a particular album of theirs that they really like a lot, that you feel hasn't gotten enough credit, really should have performed better on the charts, should get more recognition. And so we're gonna find out how Kit feels about this when it comes to the group and solo careers of the Beatles. And so why don't we start, Kit, with why don't we start with Paul? We almost always end with Paul because there's so much material, you know. Do something different here. But
shake it up.
he's made so many albums now throughout his career. And what would you feel? He's had so much success too. What would be the one album you would point to as being his most underrated album?
Well, you know, I know we've talked a lot about Press to Play, and that is definitely an underrated album, but I decided to go with a different one because I think this is an album that's gotten a bit lost in the shuffle in recent years, which is Memory Almost Full. I think it has been sort of skipped over because a lot of people, rightly so, have talked about Chaos and Creation being such a wonderful album, and it is. Love that album. And then it just kind of gets skipped over into, then people start talking about the, going into New or Egypt Station or whatever. Memory Almost Full, I thought, was such a solid effort. It really showed a different side of Paul. It was at a time in his life where you could tell he was kind of expanding upon themes of chaos and creation in terms of being reflective. But he was in a time where, he was reflecting sort of on his mortality, and growing older. And there were some really outstanding songs on there. The End of the End, I mean, is just incredible songwriting. It just brings you to tears when you hear it, and incredible images of things about when after he dies, he wants people to remember him, and about telling stories and images of it being like rolling out carpets of for children to play on. I mean, just this is just what Paul McCartney is all about as a songwriter. And just these wonderful, wonderful images. But there were also great, Only Mama Knows, a wonderful throwback to Wings. I mean, you just hear that. And it just, I mean, it was like 70s Wings. That was great. That was me. I've always I wish he'd do that in concert. I love that. And the way he was looking back in his career and, kind of saying, wow, I can't believe I really did that. And I think we can all relate to that in some way when you look back on your life, like, I can't believe I did that. And, I think we can all appreciate that. And Dance Tonight, of course, was one of the major hits from that, which is a charming song. Ever Present Past, I think was a great number. And David Kane, now I've not a big fan of Driving Rain, but I think on Memory Almost Full, he did a great job producing this, really on particularly House of Wax. I think that was a great example of his production style, injecting some modern sounds into it, but not overdoing it. I mean, it is a Paul McCartney album, but there were some, like hints of electronic sounds in some parts of it, but not overdoing it. And I've just always enjoyed this album from the moment I first heard it. And, you don't hear it very much. I don't recall hearing a lot of it, even on the Beatles channel. And I don't understand why, it isn't talked about more. And so when you brought up this topic, that, is a possibility, I'm like, I know exactly what I'm going to mention. And I want to talk about Memory Almost Full.
Well, good. You raised some excellent points here. There's always the case with a lot of artists where they release a great album, and then no matter what, their follow-up album can't compare to it in the eyes of a lot of people. Even though an album like Venus and Mars was a major success, a #1 album in the US, a lot of people, if they compare that to Ben on the Run, it's not as good as. I don't feel that way. I think Venus and Mars is a terrific album, but I think that Memory Almost Full kind of has that kind of fate as well. And from the things that I've said on podcast shows and certainly on Talk More Talk, The End of the End to me is one of the greatest masterpieces of all of Paul McCartney's career. And for those who think he doesn't write great lyrics, listen to the lyrics of The End of the End. And it was a very brave thing for him to address his mortality in a song like that. But he got the idea from going to an Irish wake and just knowing that people there were laughing and having a good time and celebrating life instead of mourning death. And that was kind of what his wish was for when his time comes. But yeah, so many of the things you said, it's interesting. That Was Me, which is an incredible song. He performed that at the Amoeba gig, but he didn't do that during his tour. That's such a fantastic song, and that bass line of his, which drives it so much. Yeah, See Your Sunshine is another favorite of mine on that album. Incredible bass playing on that, and Ever Present Past is one of the most hypnotic songs for me because every time I hear it, I can't get the song out of my head. But I would tend to agree with you. It's a very much overlooked album and certainly needs to be reassessed. Vintage Clothes is another song that's very nostalgic, you
Absolutely.
know.
Yeah, he was definitely in that reflective, period in his life. And I think you bring up a good point that I think it probably, it's a little bit like, I've often said, like, Paul Simon's Rhythm of the Saints album, I absolutely
Mm,
love, but it got completely overshadowed by Graceland.
right.
And I think it's every bit as good an album as Graceland, but it just, Graceland was just so huge, and probably you're right that Chaos and Creation was so acclaimed and all that then, probably Memory Almost Full just couldn't, compete in many ways. So I'm hoping that Memory Almost Full will eventually, now that enough time has passed, that will eventually get rediscovered, because I really think it deserves a lot more.
Mm. Yeah, and I think David Kahn was a really good choice as a producer for Paul, and he's the
Mhm.
one that brought along many of the new members of his band of the last 20 years.
Yeah,
That was
that's
through
true.
him.
Yep,
So,
that's true. Yeah, I mean that's right, and they really, have done a lot for Paul's sound, and and as I said, I really do like the production on this album. As I said, it's definitely updating his sound a bit, adding some little touches of electronic and all, but not overdoing it. Just modernizing it enough,
hmm,
and just has a nice clean sound to it, and but for something like The End of the End, minimal production when it's necessary. I mean, obviously with that song you do not need a big
yeah,
over, that is, you want the lyrics to be the star of
right.
that. Mhm.
Yeah, it's such an intimate song, and
Yeah,
I wish that
exactly.
he'd do that one live. That'd be a
Oh,
real tear jerker
I
right
was going to
there.
say, get out the Kleenex. Yes.
And House of Wax, yeah, what a tremendous song that is. And Paul's vocals are amazing on there. And he did perform that live. It was
Yes.
incredible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Paul's vocals are terrific on this album. It's just an all around great effort, and as I said, I do hope that as the years go on, it will be rediscovered.
Okay. Totally agree with you there. Let's move on and do Ringo next.
Okay. Well, this is an album that, it's a bit less underrated than it used to be, but I'm glad it is, but I'm still going to include it, which is Time Takes Time,
Hmm.
because it is, this was just a crime that it sold as poorly as it did,
Hmm.
because it was such a strong effort. I mean, this to me, it rated right up there with Ringo, and it was really because he was with such a small label. I mean, he was just coming off. This was his comeback. He had come off the difficult 80s period where he was coming out of rehab. He was rebuilding his career, and he had signed with this small label.
Hmm.
And I think they just did not have the funds to properly promote this album, because if they had, I'm not saying this would have been a number one album. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm not saying that, but I think, I was looking it up, I think it only reached, like, what was it, like 90 or something on the charts. I'm trying to remember. I mean, it was really low.
I
um
might have it in front of
I was
me.
going to say, Mr.
I
Chartman
think I
here.
think
That's
it was
it
98, was
may,
it?
that may even be, yeah.
Time Takes Time didn't even make the top 200.
You're kidding me.
No.
Oh my gosh. I mean, and that was an absolute crime, because what an album this was. Ringo's voice sounded terrific,
Hmm.
and the songs just fit him perfectly.
Yeah.
Yes, some of them you could say were a bit Beatle-esque, but not overdone. They were just perfectly suited toward him. Some of them with a touch of humor, but Weight of the World. I mean, I remember when this came out, when I first heard it, and I instantly just gravitated toward it. I mean, it had a little Beatlesque sound, but not overdone. Great vocal performance from Ringo,
Hmm.
catchy, terrific message even. I mean, kind of related to what he had gone through. I mean, he could sort of, because he had gone through such problems in the 80s, personal problems. So, I
Sure.
mean, he could really deliver it convincingly. Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go. I got to see him perform that live in the 90s. I'm trying to remember what year it was, 94, 95, something like that.
95 he toured.
95. Okay. And it sounded even better live.
Hmm.
Just a great rocker. Golden Blunders was or not, I'm sorry, not Golden Blunders. What am I thinking? There was another one. Oh yes, Golden Blunders. Yes, I'm right. Golden Blunders was a great one. I mean, there are just so many that were, they just, one track after another was just so strong, and had worked with incredible producers. Jeff
Yep.
Lynne, Don Was,
Peter
you know,
Asher.
yeah, I mean, just, wonderful producers of the day, and still great producers.
Hmm.
It was just such a stellar effort, and deserved, much more success. And as I said, I don't remember a lot of. There was a video for Weight of the World, I know that,
Hmm.
but I don't remember a ton of press around it. It just, and again, I think it was just because it was a small label. And I'm glad. I think now it's starting to get more attention. I think, fans are starting to kind of rediscover it, and I hope that continues, because it is a great, great album.
I totally agree with you. And what I usually say about that album is that there are 10 songs and it's as solid an album as you could get from Ringo. You get the feeling that maybe he was handed 15 songs and these were the 10 of the best.
Yeah.
Every song made perfect sense for him to do. And like we've said in our podcast show, we just did a show about Paul McCartney and talking about whether his music is better when he produces himself or when he has co-producers. And we talked about albums like Flowers in the Dirt and New that had multiple producers. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a consistency in the sound on those albums where you can't tell one producer from another. Time Takes Time is a lot like that, with the exception of the Jeff Lynne songs where you know it's Jeff Lynne. But the
Yeah.
other three producers, and the other one that we didn't mention is Phil Ramone, there's such a
Oh yeah.
consistency there. And it has a modern sound and yet harkens back to the old style of Ringo with great melodies and great hooks. And yeah, every single song is strong
Yeah.
on Time Takes Time and fits for Ringo. And yeah, there's a little bit of Beatley stuff. I Don't Believe You is a song
Yeah.
that's like 1965 Beatles, like What Goes On, kind of like in that style. Golden Blunders was a song that the Posies did. I'm
Mhm.
not quite sure how it reached Ringo, whether
Yeah,
Peter
that was a
Asher,
mystery.
I don't know
Yeah.
if he suggested it or not, but
Mhm.
everything on that album made sense and it just sounded great. And, I've often pointed out that as artists get older, they're not programmed to younger audiences in radio. And such is the case with Ringo here. I mean, the hits stopped coming after the first
Yeah.
half of the 70s, and it was very hard for him to just regain what had happened in that the first half of that decade. And it's very tough for a lot of artists,
Yeah.
veteran artists, to get airplay once they got older in their 50s and 60s. The
Right.
top 40 stations are not going to play you. You have to find other formats like adult contemporary that might play your music, which is what happened with a lot of Elton John and Rod Stewart and Eric Clapton stuff.
Yeah.
And Paul suffered from that too.
Sure.
He wasn't getting the airplay in the 90s that he had gotten in the 70s and 80s. That's just a natural thing because
Right.
of radio. So that plays a part in it too. And I'm not
Yeah.
denying what you're
Oh no.
saying about it being a small label and all, not having maybe the money to spend on the promotion.
Yep. Yeah, and I remember Weight of the World, the way I first heard it was, I think it was through Musician Magazine, which I miss so much. I
Mm,
love that magazine. I subscribe, and they used to have like I think like a sampler CD that they would put out every once in a while with the with the magazine, and they had like songs, current songs, and it was sort of like, hey, these are some singles that are new songs out, check these out.
mm.
And Weight of the World was on one of those compilations,
Oh, cool.
and that's where I first heard it. And I just, because I at the time I didn't follow Ringo's solo stuff as much as Paul's and George's stuff, and so that's where I first heard it.
Mm,
And I just instantly fell in love with the song. And then I do remember seeing the video on VH1.
right.
Yeah, but that was about it. I mean, that was all. That's all I remember. And it just, what a great effort. And as you said, the producers, the songs that were either written for Ringo or were chosen, in the case of Gold Blunders. I mean, these were people that knew how, really knew what would be best, for Ringo,
Right.
for his personality, for his voice. Just a solid album. It's one of my all-time favorites of Ringo's, and I'm glad it's just starting, I think, to gain more appreciation, and love to see more people discover it out there.
Yeah. Well, I enjoy when I watch podcast shows, including our own, where we praise that album. So by constantly
Hmm.
doing that, hopefully more people are becoming aware of that album and
Absolutely.
just how solid an album it was. Yeah,
Mm.
very good. All right, let's take a break here and do the Beatles as a group. And
Okay.
I got to tell you, this has got to be like the toughest thing for me because every Beatles album to me is great. You know, it's just a
Yep.
question of which album do you think is the least great? You know,
Yep.
uh, and then certainly in my mind, I can't look at an album like Yellow Submarine with half George Martin music the same way as I would, a full Beatles album. And then
Right.
you also have to question, do you think of Magical Mystery Tour as the album or a double EP? But I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. Is there such a thing as an underrated Beatles album? Because I know the
Um,
Beatles catalog is so praised, from start
yep.
to finish. But what would you put in this category?
This actually was not super hard for me because there is one album that I think has gotten a bad rap over the years, which is Beatles for Sale.
Hmm.
This has been the one that, I mean, I remember when I first started getting into the Beatles and I would be, reading up on them and all. This was the album that was always, and even watching the complete Beatles, well, going back old school. Even that documentary was like, look at the cover, and then how depressed they were,
Mm,
and it was kind of a dark album, and and others say, it was kind of a, they had to hastily put this album together, so they just covered a bunch of stuff they used to do in their in the cavern and live shows. And I mean, it just has always been classified as just sort of a weaker album,
mm,
just one they kind of had to do to fulfill their contract. I think that's really unfair. And in fact, it was an album that it took me a little longer to fully appreciate it. Um, but I think it's actually a fascinating album to look at because it is an album where you can hear their transition. Um, it's after a hard day's night. And of course, you can, on that album too, you can start hearing their transition to, start moving toward a more complicated kind of songwriting style and all. But on Beatles for Sale, you hear it even more.
mm.
Um, when you look at the originals on there, I mean, that I think that trio, No Reply, I'm a Loser, and Babies in Black.
Right.
I mean, just those three. I mean, those are some incredible compositions and a real change in their style. I mean, that's a preview of Help. some of the stuff you'll hear on Help right there, like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away
Hmm.
and all that. I mean, this little bit of a darker turn, even a little bit of a preview of Rubber Soul with that more acoustic kind of sound. And I know not everybody likes Babies in Black, but I like that the waltz, they're experimenting. They're experimenting with these different tempos, and also, I mean, it's you're hearing them expanding their broadening their palette here. Of course, with I'm a Loser, you're hearing that Dylan influence that's coming in here.
Hmm.
I mean, John Lennon's really growing even more as a songwriter. For Paul, I'll Follow the Sun, I think an underrated track of his. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful song. And 8 Days a Week I've talked about this on other shows. That's the song that made me become a Beatles fan. So and it's a hit anyway, but I'll always have affection for that because that's the song that hooked me, because it's just so catchy. I've just always loved it. I have a suspicion that you kind of like Every Little Thing.
Best song they ever did.
Yes.
Without a doubt, yes.
And I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, I've always liked. I think that's I mean, I just love the kind of Everly Brothers like harmonies on that. What You're Doing, I mean, it's just another Paul track a bit about the tumultuous relationship with Jane Asher, and these are all just previews of what we're going to hear on Help, Rubber Soul, and I just think these are really great songs that except for 8 Days a Week, that's not underrated, but some others that should be given a lot more credit. And as far as the cover goes, okay, they're covers, they're great covers, so what that they covered some things. And I just think this is an album that has just gotten such a bad rap over the years as this throwaway kind of album, and the weakest, and I think it's a really fascinating album when you think of it as a sort of transitional album, and tracking their growth as songwriters and musicians.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here. Couldn't you say that every Beatles album marked a transition?
Oh,
Couldn't
sure.
you see progression from one album to the next? So how different is that in this case?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're all transitional albums in many ways. That's very true. But I've always found this one particularly interesting because you're getting that, as I said, that Dylan-esque kind of influence. I mean, you're really starting to see what we would get in that, in the beginning of what I call the Beatles 2.0 period, which to me is more like, I guess I'd say, technically starting with Revolver, I guess, but the Rubber Soul is little bit I guess starts that a bit, but I don't know, I just always sense with Beatles for Sale there's such a darker tone to it,
yes,
that I don't hear on the previous albums. I mean, that you just sense that there's something different going on here. When I say darker, I don't mean depressing, really. I mean, because that's what everybody said. Look at the cover, look how depressed they are, they're burned out. I don't mean that. I mean just this, maybe more cynical, but it's a deeper kind of, they're moving beyond just writing about, love, and now they're exploring other kinds of feelings. And so you just sense when you listen to this, at least I do, they're going in another direction here. They're starting to explore some other areas, and they're looking to expand their songwriting palette.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think when you take a look at those first three songs on Beatles for Sale,
Yeah,
it's all about a relationship that's in trouble.
Hmm. Yeah.
They aren't happy songs at all.
Hmm.
So just to start off an album that way, I think maybe some people rate Beatles for Sale as low as they do because it's coming off an album that was all originals for the first time.
Right.
So if you take a look at the first two Beatles albums, there were 6 covers on there.
Mhm.
Then Hard Day's Night, 13 songs, all original. And now they're going back to their old ways and putting 6 covers on the album again. So maybe some people think less of the album because they made such progress with all, original stuff on A
Sure.
Hard Day's Night. So maybe that's part of the reason why people feel that way. But in addition to that, I really hate every single time I hear people say Mr. Moonlight is the worst song they ever
Yeah.
did. If that's the worst song, they did okay by me.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we've talked about Mr. Moonlight, and I mean, I think if they hadn't had that organ in there, I mean, I didn't like the organ, but John's performance, I mean, that beginning
Hmm,
when he yells, sings Mr. Moonlight, I mean, wow,
right.
chills. I mean, he had one of the best rock voices ever. I
Oh,
mean, if
definitely.
that doesn't make you sit up and take notice when he sings that, wow, incredible. And yes, everybody likes to crap on that song. And it's yeah, but I also think, by the way, it good to have that, because it is kind of a time capsule of what they were covering too in their live shows back in the cavern and everything. So
Hmm,
I'm glad to have those covers as well, because we get a sense of what they were doing in their live shows. So, because of course we don't have at least good good quality
hmm.
recordings of those shows. So I'm glad they did some of those live or those covers of what they used to do
Yeah,
in their live shows. So it's good to have those.
it reflects the variety in the music of the stuff that they covered as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
And when you talk about foreshadowing what was to come, when you've got songs like I'm a Loser or I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, which I kind of classify as being sort of rockabilly, definitely I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, country and Western. Some of that you could hear later on in their music.
Hmm.
I mean, Rubber Soul, What Goes On to me has a country and Western feel to it,
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you see all different styles. I mean, you see them going, I mean, not that they hadn't ventured into other genres before, but you see them doing it even more. So yeah, I just get kind of tired of how this album is classified as, oh, it's this weak album, and it's and as I said, people fixate on the cover and no, they were burned out, and really the I think the music then tends to get a little overshadowed, and I think it is really a fascinating, it's just another way to look at how they were transitioning as songwriters, as artists, how they were, as you said, experimenting further in different genres, and so
hmm.
I stick up for this album.
And the great thing about one of the many the Beatles catalog is how solid it is throughout, to the point where it's far more than just the singles. And when you start to explore all the album cuts, many of which didn't get airplay or really don't get airplay today unless it's on a Beatles program, a
Hmm.
song like What You're Doing is a really good song. And
Yeah.
honestly, I do think Every Little Thing is a great song. And even Paul thought it could be a single, as he
Hmm.
has told, and he went to Brian Epstein and Brian vetoed it as a single. But there's so many songs that could have been hits that the Beatles could have had so many more hit records than they had already, as we've talked about,
Exactly.
here on my channel here.
Yep.
And all these songs, I Don't Want to Spoil the Party,
Yeah.
although that was a B-side here. But
Yes.
I'm a Loser could have been a hit. No Reply could have been a hit. And
Yep.
and you talk about John's great vocals. Come on, as much as I love the original songs that the Beatles wrote, some of John's best vocals are the covers. Rock and roll
Exactly.
music Fantastic. It's one of the
Yep.
greatest covers of any rock song, you
Yep.
know?
Exactly. And as I said, I'm really glad they did those because, and I know we have covers from the BBC sessions,
Yeah,
I know that. But it's great to have those because it does give us an idea of, what they were playing in some of those, the cavern shows or in Hamburg, and because we do have some recordings, but as I said, not great quality.
right.
so it's great to have an idea of, what they sounded like in those shows. So
Mm.
as close as we're going to get.
Okay, very good. Let's move on now to John.
Okay, well, I've talked about this album before, but Walls and Bridges, I
Mm,
love Walls and Bridges, and I know it's not perhaps and then unfortunately is we know we don't have as many albums to choose from John, so some may say, oh, it's not super underrated, but today you tend to hear, when you think of John Lennon, it's Plastic Ono Band, it's Imagine, it's Double Fantasy.
right.
Those are the three you always hear about, and they're all wonderful albums, of
Mm,
course. But Walls and Bridges tends to get lost in the shuffle a little bit, and I've always loved this album, and I just think it's fascinating, because it's in some ways some of the songs on here are just as confessional as some of the Plastic Ono Band songs were,
sure.
and maybe not as raw, but they are in their own way. Um, I think Scared
Yes.
is wow. I mean, that is such an intense kind of track. Um, and Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. I mean,
Hmm.
that is an absolutely um, just a really resting kind of song.
Mm,
What You Got, that's one of my favorites off the album. First of all, because of his voice on that. I mean,
yep.
he just shreds on that. But it's also, uh, to me, if you want a summary of the Lost Weekend, like his whole Lost Weekend, listen to that. I mean, because part of it is you can tell it's like this conflict he's going through of okay, it's Saturday night and I just got to rip it up. I mean, he's out partying, but then he says, but it's pretty empty. You don't know
Mm,
what you got until you lose it.
right.
Baby, give me one more chance. I mean, you can tell this inner conflict that he's having, he's out partying and living it up, but he misses Yoko. And I just think it's just a brilliant, brilliant song. I know we've talked about it many times, but Bless You
Hmm.
is a beautiful song.
Right.
And just such a tender song, and not a straightforward love song, because I think it's just incredible that he's basically, saying, whoever is with Yoko at the time, I mean, to, kind of bless them as well. I
Mm,
mean, wow, that's pretty big of him to say that. And but of course that he still loves her and hopes that they may be together again, but kind of accepting they may not. Um, but that he will still love her anyway, and so blessing her wherever she is. I mean, it's sad. It's a very sad song, but it's also very touching. One
mm,
of my favorites of his. God, there's just so many, and Number Nine Dream and one
sure.
of course, we all know that.
Uh-huh.
Really haunting track. Whatever Gets You Through the Night, the other big hit from that, although that's actually not one of my favorites from this. But then you get a great jam like Beef Jerky. So, I mean, there's a bit of everything on here. You get some
Right.
fun tracks, you get some romantic, you get some, um, really haunting. You get, there's a bit of everything
Hmm.
on this. And I just feel like, today, this album doesn't get the credit that it deserves. I think it's every bit as strong um, as certainly Double Fantasy or others that that I just think it's, I don't know. I know I've said this a lot on the show, but it gets
Yeah.
lost in the shuffle. It really does.
And for an album that actually made it all the way to #1 in the
Mhm.
United States, this should not be an album that gets lost in the shuffle at
Yeah,
all.
exactly.
I feel the same way. Well, between this and Mind Games, I would
Mhm.
say the same thing when it
Yeah.
comes to Lennon's solo career. And I think perhaps because of what John said, as you mentioned before, John listed his best albums as being Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, and then Double Fantasy, and everything else in the middle got tossed off in the
Yeah.
process. And it's really a shame because he still wrote great material. He still put out amazing lyrics, very personal, deeply personal songs, as he has in this album, Walls and Bridges. I'm glad you pointed out Scared, because that's a song. Oh, I love it. I've always loved the song. I love it so much more now. And I
Yeah.
love the whole arrangement with the brass and his
Yes.
vocals there. You do it so well, well, well.
Yeah.
That part. And then on top of all that, as I've pointed out in our podcast show, is since a lot of people like the more stripped down versions of songs, you listen to some of those versions, like what was on Men Love Avenue, or there's a bootleg that's out of just the band without the full production with horns and everything else. And it's so good. The songs are so good just by themselves without all the extra production.
Yep.
And in some ways, Scared could be even more haunting
Mhm.
without everything else. But I
Yep.
still love the brass and everything
Yeah.
else that was applied in there. I still think it was a brilliantly produced album.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you make a good point. I think that that John himself saying that those were his three best albums, and and he did tend to say that whole Lost Weekend period, that basically, oh, I was a mess, and nothing I did during that period was really any good. He said that
Mm,
years later. Well, Walls and Bridges, to me, disproves that. I mean, that I think that's a stellar album, and yes, I understand he was going through very difficult times. He was you know drinking, drugging, whatever,
uh-huh.
going through the and going through personal other personal issues for sure. But I mean, in terms of his songwriting, in terms of his singing, the production and all, I mean, that is a great album. And, I really think, uh, it shouldn't be dismissed. I mean, I think it's right up there with Imagine, Plastic Ono Band, Double Fantasy. I mean, I
Right.
think it should be considered one among the best.
If
Uh,
you remember what he said shortly before he died, he said it was the work of a semi-sick craftsman. He said, listen to the album. It sounds like the guy's depressed,
yep.
as if
But
that's a bad thing.
that's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, and
What was Plastic Ono Band?
well,
That
exactly.
was not a happy album,
No,
you know?
no. That's one of the things that makes the album good. I mean, I'm sorry he was going through that, of course, but
Right.
I'm not wishing anything. But I mean, yeah, that's what makes the album so good. When you hear something like Scared or Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. Yeah, yes, he was depressed and going through that, but that's what makes the album good,
Mm,
because the lyrics are so raw. His vocals are so raw. You feel, that's what made him such a great artist,
yeah.
that his honesty. So, so yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, that's what made it a good album. I mean, that's what, if I had interviewed him and he had said that to me, I would have said, yes, that's exactly the point.
Some of the best albums ever are depressing albums. That's just the way it is.
Exactly.
You want to be, honest with your fans of what you're going through.
Right.
And Steel and Glass, another great one. Great
Yes.
vocals in that. Wow.
Mhm.
Amazing vocals on this album.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
All right. Great choices. It just reminds me of, it's very important as fans to know what the Beatles have said about their careers and how they've looked at their work. We don't have to agree with them,
Right.
you know. Plenty of
Exactly.
times I've disagreed with them.
Oh,
And
sure.
That's not being disrespectful. We can all have our own, develop our own opinions,
You
and they're
bet.
all valid. So, all
Yeah.
right. So, last Beatle here is George. I have a feeling I know which one you're going to go with. I hope you prove that I'm wrong, because normally
Uh,
you like to bring up 33 and a third a lot, but I don't know if that's the one here. Is that the one you picked?
yes, it is.
Oh, okay. All right.
I was torn between 33 and a third and George Harrison. I went
Hmm.
back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But, I had to do it. I had to go with my heart. I love 33 and a third. I love this album. I
Yeah.
had to do it. And I know that I'm glad it's getting more attention now.
Right.
It really is. And I'm so glad. But still, today you tend to think, if you say George Harrison to somebody, it's, all things must pass, Cloud Nine.
Right.
But I just, this album, I just have loved forever. And I'm so glad that more people are discovering it. I love my R&B and my soul. And this album, I love how much soul is on this. Woman, Don't You Cry for Me. I mean, the bass, Willie Weeks' bass on that, and George's vocals are fit perfectly. Pure Smokey. I love that. His tribute to Smokey Robinson. Learning How to Love You is one of my all-time favorite George songs.
Gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
Hmm.
And it's one of those that we've talked about many times, that it could be spiritual, could be romantic. He has both, both meanings to it. Oh my gosh, I mean, there's so many great ones. Beautiful Girl is beautiful, is beautiful. And then of course you've got Wonderful Humor on here. This song, Cracker Box Palace. I know everybody knows that. That's the thing about this album. There are some songs that everybody knows now. I mean, like Cracker Box Palace, or this song. But there are so many great deep tracks on here. It's What You Value is another one that I think people tend to look over. And I've heard some people diss Pure Smokey, and I'm here to say, too bad. I love it. I mean, not only because it's about Smokey Robinson, but also it's just a beautiful song. And I love when George, explores his love of R&B. And so he had talked about it many times throughout his career, how R&B influenced him, and he would occasionally, explore it in his own music. And I love when he did that. And I just, I just love this song. I love the chord changes, and I love how he works in little Smokey lyrics throughout the song, and it's just just really charming. I've always enjoyed it. So I just think this was such a great comeback for him, but. I think you just and I was interested. I thought it was interesting when I read some reviews from the time this came out, and I was a little surprised. It was not universally praised. There were some reviewers who did not like it at the time. I don't know if they thought it was too soft or something, and I mean, ridiculous. I think it's it's one of my all-time favorites of his. I go back to this album again and again.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting now, I was just thinking about this. The All Things Must Pass box set came out recently, and it has that early version of Woman, Don't You Cry for Me, which has got, it's more like a hillbilly-esque kind of arrangement to it. How did it go from that to the R&B type arrangement on this album? I find that fascinating. What made him want to bring that song back and give it that kind of an arrangement? Beautiful Girl also comes from that period of All Things Must Pass. Right. So yeah, I love the 33 and a third and George Harrison back to back. To me, they're so great. They're so equal to me. It's hard for me to pick between the two, which I like
I
more.
know they're like
Yeah.
bookends or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Volume 1, volume 2. I went back and forth for
Yeah.
this.
I know. And as I've mentioned a few times, I think starting with maybe Far East Man, there is that kind of R&B and jazz influence in George's music that he later put into Pure Smokey,
Yeah.
Ooh Baby, Learning How to Love You has that feel to it. And working with, you know, jazz musicians at the time,
Yep.
Richard T, people like that, I think that probably was an influence in his sound,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was great how those two albums really showcase, I think people tended to think of George maybe at that time as, a bit more in his solo career, a bit more, rock, or maybe on the folk side, they tended. And so it was so great when he did these albums that he really showcased more this other side of him,
Right.
this rock or jazz soul R&B side. It was so great to see that, this multi-dimensional side that, I mean, it wasn't new. I mean, in the Beatles, he certainly showed he could do some R&B, but not so much in the solo career. It was, later on that he started, showing that. And those two albums, I just thought, really, he really started showcasing this little, this other side of him, had a little bit of a different sound. And I loved it. And 33 and a third slightly edges out George Harrison for me, but slightly. They're both good.
And
hard to pick.
That second half of the 70s, George held his own. His albums made the top 20. They both went gold. They didn't tear up the charts, but they were accepted fairly well. And he had top 20 singles with Crackerbox Palace and Blow Away. This song was top 40, number 25, I think. So, it was a good period, I think, overall for George. He wasn't charting as high as the first half of the 70s, but certainly in the quality of the music, it was definitely there.
I was surprised that they didn't chart higher when I was, looking into it. I was surprised because, I mean, I thought, they both were so good. I was amazed when I looked it up. I just thought, wow, they deserve to be chart higher than that.
Yeah. Well, for me, 33 and a third and George Harrison were better than Dark Horse and Extra Texture.
Yes.
My opinion here. Just my opinion. But
I agree.
I know a lot of people love those albums too. So as I do, I think 33 and a third and George Harrison were an improvement overall, but terrific songs on the previous ones.
Oh yeah. Yep. But yeah, I just thought these had such a great sound. And so I'm just thinking, I don't want those to get lost in the shuffle, particularly for younger fans, because, they tend to hear now. I mean, it's always, and I love All Things Must Pass. Who doesn't? But, that's all you tend to hear about. And I really, George Harrison Estate, give us those box sets for those. Those two. I'll be first in line to get a 33 and a third box set.
Okay.
With or without
I don't know.
films.
I might top you. I might be the first.
Oh, but, okay.
I will tell you, Kit, sincerely here, I read a lot of what people post online on Facebook pages, the Beatles Facebook pages. I think George Harrison's catalog has been reappraised overall. I don't think it's just All Things Must Pass and Cloud Nine. I think people are recognizing the other albums too. And they probably think still more highly of All Things Must Pass and Cloud Nine, but those other albums are coming up, I think.
I'm glad. Yeah. I think it's better than it was. Yeah. Cause I remember years ago, at one of the Fest for Beatles fans talking about 33 and a third. And it was not as quite as well thought of as it is now. So I'm really glad that it's going up in stature. because it should not. I mean, it wasn't hated or anything, but it just wasn't as, well regarded, I guess, or just kind of ignored. And I'm really glad that, I think in recent years, it's more people are paying attention to it.
Yeah. And I also feel in John's case, I think more people are recognizing mind games and walls and bridges than before,
Yep.
from
Yep.
what I've been observing. So that's why it's
Mhm.
so important to have conversations like these on my channel, other podcast shows. We all serve a purpose here. Most important thing is
Absolutely.
that we're talking about it.
You bet. You bet.
All right. So before we go, a couple things I want to talk to you about. First of all, I think our viewers should know that you'll be conducting a class on Carole King's Tapestry.
Mhm.
So why don't you tell the folks about that?
Sure. This is Tuesday Night Music Club. This is through Monmouth University. Our good friend Ken Womack hosts these, as he describes these. It's like a book club, but with records. And so I'll be co-hosting. This is Tuesday, March 15th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And this month, it's going to be, as you mentioned, Tapestry by Carole King. I am so looking forward to co-hosting this with them. We're going to be talking about the making of the album. We'll play certain selections from it. We won't have time to play the whole album, but and talk about, I mean, we'll be talking about, there's so much to say about what makes this album so special. And,
Yeah.
there's so much to say about it. But it is absolutely free to register, and I'll be giving you the link, Ken, so you can put that up in the description or wherever you want to put it.
Mhm.
And as I said, free to register, and we take questions, and it's always fun to do these. So hope you'll join us.
Wow. I mean, that's one of the greatest albums ever, and
Yep,
has been
sure is.
praised for a long time, deservedly so. And she's one of my heroes, to me, one of the greatest songwriters ever, Carole
Me
King.
too. Hero of mine.
Yeah. Okay. One other thing we got to mention is that you're now doing kind of like a series with our friend Plastic EP, who is from Australia. For those of you who don't know, Plastic is kind of like he lives on YouTube. He doesn't have a life, folks. I just want to let you know that.
Yeah, not sure if he sleeps.
The first time he interviewed me, I just gotten a link for him, and I had written to him, and it was over. It was after midnight, and I said to him, "When you want to do the interview?" He said, "Now." You know,
Yep,
just like
yep.
that. Doesn't matter what
That's
time
him.
of day, you know. And
That's him, all right.
he's done tons of interviews with people in the Beatle world, podcasters, us. You've been on his show many times. How many shows? He recently had a big milestone. What was it? Was it
Oh, I'm trying to remember. He's working up to 700, I think. That
okay?
he's at like 600 and something shows. I forget which, but he's working up to 700 shows. I mean,
Okay.
wow.
And I noticed most recently he interviewed Michael Lindsay Hogg,
Yes, he did.
and I
Yep.
think he interviewed Glenn Johns too, right?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he has interviewed him. Yep.
So
So he is nonstop. But yes, we just started a show together called Greatest Shows of the 60s, and we'll eventually move on to Greatest Shows of the 70s. This just started as just some fun conversations we were having online, reminiscing about different shows. Now I caught these shows in reruns in the 70s and 80s. I didn't see these when these first came on, but I can still talk about them. So we were just reminiscing. I think this started from a conversation about Happy Days. I think that's how it
okay.
started. And because he was interviewing Donnie Most. He
Oh,
interviewed him, and so I
okay.
was all excited about that. So, and so these conversations led to the show. So we do this once a week, and we take a different show each week. Last one we did was on Gilligan's Island, and that really got a lot of attention. People really seem to enjoy it, and we talk about the making of the show. We share some trivia about it, and then we do it live so people join in and talk about their memories of the show. So the next one we're doing, it will be about Lost in Space. Danger, danger. So and so as soon as I know, I don't know the exact time and date yet, but it'll be on Plastic EP's page, Facebook page. So just go to his page and give it a like, and you'll be notified when it'll be on. And of course, you can do the same on my page as well, and you'll know. So join us. It's a lot of fun, and you never know who might pop on the show.
Yeah,
join us.
I'm hoping to reappear soon.
Yes,
And,
indeed.
you know, all of us in the Beatles podcast world show up on his channel. And he is a huge Beatle fan, big Monkees fan too, if you
Yes,
love
he
the
is.
Monkees. So yeah, by all means, check out his YouTube page and make sure you watch the shows with Kit. And are you really a big fan of 60s TV? Or is that like your
I like,
favorite decade or what?
you know, I like 60s and 70s. You know, I watch, you know, a lot of 60s stuff. You know, I joke when I was homesick from school and everything. That's what I watch. And then of course, huge Monkees fan. I'm a huge Monkees fan. So I watched a lot of the Monkey stuff. But yeah, it was really funny when I was having these conversations with Plastic and we were reminiscing. I was like, wow, I guess I did watch a lot of 60s TV. So yeah, I mean, like Lost in Space, I'm like, yep, watch that. Brady Bunch, yep, sure, I can handle that.
Uh-huh.
You know, or like going through all these shows, Lost, yeah. I mean, it was just so funny. Like, yeah, I guess I can talk. I Dream of Jeannie, we did that. I'm like, yep, watch that.
Yep.
No problem.
Were you more of an I Dream of Jeannie fan or a Bewitched fan?
Oh man, that's hard because I watched both. Probably I Dream of Jeannie because I loved her bottle.
That's what won you over, huh? The
The
bottle.
banquettes, the
Okay.
banquettes and the pink and purple. As a kid, I mean, when I was watching that as a kid, you know, that's when I was playing with Barbies and stuff. So that was like right up my alley. You know?
Okay. Dare I ask? I mean, how are we getting off on this topic? But Munsters or Adam's Family?
Oh, Munsters all the way.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I watched the Munsters. Yeah, that was when I was coming home at from at lunch, grade school. Our local one of our local stations here showed the Munsters, and so I would watch the Munsters at lunch. Yeah, yep, hands down.
I'm more an
Team
Adam's
Grandpa.
Family fan, but I love both, definitely. Incredible. Those two shows were only on for 2 years
Wow,
each. That's it. But they live on in syndication and they're classics. So,
that's the thing. See, that's how I caught them all was syndication. Yeah.
yeah.
And so, yep. So yeah, it's fun to do these shows. And see, these are the kind of conversations we also have on our on our shows, and people share their memories. And you know, I tell stories like, you know, Barbies and all that. So it's great. It's great nostalgia.
It's also great to hear some of us talk about something other than the Beatles once in a while. So
Exactly. That's why I tell people, like, I swear to God, I listen to things other than the Beatles. I watch things
yes.
other than, I swear.
Well, you know, I'm very happy to do all the work that I do and that people know me for my work on the Beatles. But just like you, there's a whole other world that we listen to.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll have a
That's for
chance,
sure.
you know, in other shows to talk about that.
Yeah. Great.
All right. So Kit, thanks so much for being here. And thanks to all of you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. And since I like to always mention this on Talk More Talk, I kind of consider everything that we do, we're all one family here. Talk More Talk, things we said today, Two Legs, my channel, Joe Mayo's channel, you know, subscribe to all of them. We're all that you need, really. It's just us. We got it all covered right here.
Yep, that's all you need.
Yeah. All you need is us. Yeah.
All you need is us. There you go.
Kid, thanks so much. And thanks to all of you for watching. And we'll see you next time.